Commander Vex Centauri's studied the holographic display hovering above her wrist, her violet eyes narrowing as data streams illuminated her sharp features. Intelligence on this backwater planet had been incomplete, a failing she would address when she returned to the fleet. The inhabitants of this Earth were more developed than reported, though still primitive by our Taxian standards. Continue surveillance protocol, she murmured to her bio-integrated AI. Minimal interaction threat. Assessment priority. Her sleek matte black exosuit adjusted to the coastal environment, its adaptive camouflage shifting to blend with the evening shadows. The humans' research facility, perched on the shoreline, was her primary target. Their oceanic studies might reveal defensive capabilities her empire had overlooked. The salt-laden breeze carried unfamiliar scents as Vex moved silently toward the illuminated building. Her mission was straightforward: assess, analyze, report. The Artaxian Dominion would then decide whether Earth warranted conquest or simple resource extraction. Either way, these humans would serve a purpose in the greater galactic order. Inside the facility, marine biologist Dr. Elijah Mason frowned at his computer screen. The anomalous readings from the deep-sea sensors had reappeared stronger this time. Something was disrupting the delicate ecosystem of the continental shelf, and the pattern seemed deliberate, artificial, he muttered, running his hand through his unruly dark hair. Has to be. His colleagues had gone home hours ago, but Mason couldn't tear himself away from the puzzle. He devoted his life to understanding ocean systems, and this disturbance felt personal, an intrusion into a world he'd sworn to protect. The crash from the east deck startled him out of his concentration. Mason grabbed his flashlight and moved cautiously toward the sound. The motion-activated lights had failed to trigger odd, considering the building's state-of-the-art security system. "Hello, security. Is that you?" The silence that answered felt charged, expectant. Mason rounded the corner to the observation deck and froze. A figure stood at the railing, silhouetted against the moonlit ocean, too tall to be human, with proportions that sent instinctive warning signals through his brain. Then it turned, and Mason's world shifted irrevocably. Vex cursed her carelessness. The monitoring equipment had been more fragile than anticipated, collapsing under her touch. Now her cover was compromised by this human male staring at her with a mixture of fear and fascination. Her hand moved to the neuralizer at her hip. A quick memory wipe would solve this problem. "Don't move," the human said, his voice surprisingly steady. "I'm not going to hurt you." The absurdity of his statement that he could hurt her almost made Vex laugh. Her species was genetically engineered for combat superiority. She could end his life between heartbeats. "You see me?" she stated momentarily, forgetting her translator should be active. The words emerged in her native tongue, a melodic cascade of sounds no human vocal cord could produce. Mason stepped closer. Is scientific curiosity overriding caution? "I don't understand. But you're not from here. Are you not from Earth at all?" Vex activated her translator and watched his eyes widen as her exosuit's camouflage fully disengaged, revealing her true form, humanoid but unmistakably alien with iridescent skin that reflected the moonlight in patterns of blue and silver. "Your observation is correct," she replied, her voice now perfectly accented English with an untraceable welt. "I am not of your world, my god," Mason whispered. "First contact. It's actually happening." Vex studied him, puzzled by his reaction. Where was the terror, the primitive aggression her mission briefings had predicted? This human seemed delighted. "Your equipment." He gestured toward the broken monitoring station. "Did you need that? Were you studying our oceans?" The question caught her off guard. He was concerned about her mission, not his safety. Fascinating. Perhaps there was more to these humans than her superiors believed I was. She admitted, deciding that limited truth served her purpose better than a memory wipe. A longer observation might yield more valuable intelligence. My communication array was integrated with your device. It is now compromised. Mason stepped close enough that Vex could study the unusual amber color of his eyes, the curious expression of wonder rather than fear. "I can help you rebuild it." He offered a smile, transforming his features. "If you'll tell me your name and why you're really here." Something unfamiliar stirred within Vex, an emotion her military conditioning hadn't prepared her for. Curiosity, perhaps? Or something more dangerous? "I am Commander Vex Tori," she replied, "making a decision that would alter the destiny of two worlds, and why I'm here is complicated." "So you're a researcher from... where did you say again?" Dr. Iris Palmer asked, eyeing Vex with undisguised suspicion.
Estonia. Vex replied smoothly, the cover story Mason had hastily created for her. Rolling off her tongue, "I specialize in deep-sea ecological monitoring systems." 3 days had passed since their encounter on the observation deck, and Mason had introduced her as a visiting scientist whose accommodations had fallen through. His colleagues at the Pacific Marine Research Center had welcomed her with varying degrees of warmth, Dr. Palmer being the notable exception. Estonia isn't exactly known for cutting-edge marine technology. Iris pressed her keen eyes lingering on Vex's unnaturally perfect posture. Mason intervened, placing a cup of coffee before Vex. "Iris, weren't you heading to the tidal pools this morning?" The school group arrives at 11 o'clock. When Palmer reluctantly departed, Vex stared at the steaming liquid. "This beverage, you consume it repeatedly. Is it a form of medication?" Mason's laughter startled her. "Our Taxian military protocol discouraged emotional displays as signs of weakness." Yet she found herself cataloging the way his eyes crinkled at the corners. "It's just coffee, mostly it's for pleasure. Though the caffeine helps us stay alert." He watched as she cautiously lifted the cup to her lips. "Careful, it's..." Vex took a substantial sip, and Mason winced, expecting her to recoil from the heat. Instead, she tilted her head, processing the sensation. Bitter yet complex. She took another sip. "Your species voluntarily consumes this. Some of us are practically addicted," Mason admitted, leaning against his desk. "Speaking of which, how's the communication array coming along?" Vex set down the cup. "The components I require aren't available with your current technology. One need to modify my approach." What she didn't say was that her superiors would already be questioning her silence. If she didn't report soon, they would assume the worst, and their response would be devastating for Earth. "I could help more if you told me what you're really trying to build," Mason said quietly. Their eyes met, and Vex felt that strange flutter again, the one that defied her biological conditioning. In just 3 days, this human had disrupted centuries of our Taxian behavioral programming. How did he cut through her defenses so effortlessly? "Not yet," she replied, "but thank you for the shelter and for not reporting my presence to your authorities." Later that evening, Mason's coastal cottage became a laboratory. As Vex dismantled what remained of her equipment, he watched fascinated as her fingers manipulated technology that seemed to blur the line between mechanical and organic. "Your species has merged with its technology," he observed, handing her a tool she'd fashioned from kitchen implements. "We evolved beyond the inefficiencies of separation," she replied, not looking up from her work. "Technology is an extension of consciousness, not a separate entity. Yet you still maintain distinct bodies. Why not fully merge?" The question surprised her. Few are Taxians ever question their evolutionary path. "Perhaps," she began, then hesitated. "Perhaps there is value in being touchable." Her words hung in the air between them, charged with unspoken meaning. Mason cleared his throat. "Are there others like you here on Earth?" "No." The lie came easily, though it wasn't entirely false. Her scout ship had been a solo mission, though the fleet waited in the shadow of your moon, cloaked from Earth's primitive detection systems. "I am alone. That must be difficult," Mason said softly, "being so far from home, surrounded by aliens." Vex looked up, struck by the empathy in his voice. "I am the alien here," she reminded him. "From where I'm sitting, we're both just people trying to figure each other out." He smiled, and that flutter returned, stronger now. "Hungry? I thought we could try pizza tonight." Human food, another new experience. Vex had been subsisting on nutrient capsules from her emergency supplies, but they were nearly depleted. "Is it safe for me? I've been monitoring your reactions to Earth's environment. Your biology seems remarkably adaptive." He didn't mention that he'd been secretly analyzing the cellular samples she'd unknowingly left behind her. Fingerprints on glass surfaces, a strand of her silver blue hair. "I think you'll be fine with most foods." An hour later, Vex discovered the pleasure of melted cheese and tomato sauce, her enhanced taste receptors overwhelmed by the combination of flavors. Mason watched with undisguised delight as she devoured 3 slices. "This pizza would be considered a luxury on my world," she admitted, licking salt from her fingers in a gesture so uncharacteristically casual that it surprised even her. "Why don't you have agriculture? We engineered efficiency. Nutrition is calculated, not experienced." Vex reached for another slice. "This is inefficient pleasurable." But inefficient sometimes the best things are. Mason's voice had dropped lower and Vex felt a strange warmth spreading through her core. After dinner they walked along the beach, the night cloaking them in privacy. The rhythm of Earth's ocean soothed Vex in ways she couldn't articulate. Her homeworld had no large bodies of water, only carefully managed hydration systems. Your moon, she said, gazing upward, it affects your oceans, creates these tidal patterns. It does more than that, Mason replied. It stabilizes our planet's axis, makes life possible. We'd be nothing without it. Vex swallowed hard. The Artaxian invasion protocol would begin with lunar-based weapons platforms. This beautiful wild planet would be systematically broken, its resources harvested, its people subjugated, and this man beside her with his kind eyes and curious mind would likely die in the first assault. Mason, she said suddenly, his name unfamiliar on her tongue. What if your world was in danger? What would you do to protect it? He turned to her, moonlight silvering his features. Whatever was necessary, he answered without hesitation. Why do you ask? Vex looked away toward the horizon where ocean met sky. Curiosity, she lied. Even as a terrible truth took root in her consciousness, she had come to assess Earth for conquest, but now found herself contemplating treason instead. 2 weeks into her unplanned extended stay on Earth, Vex found herself sitting cross-legged on Mason's living room floor, surrounded by a circle of his friends. Music played softly in the background. Bottles of wine were being passed around and laughter punctuated the warm evening air. Your turn, Vex called out Devon, the Marine Sense cheerful technician. Truth or dare? Vex glanced at Mason, who gave her an encouraging nod. She had studied the rules of this peculiar social ritual and found it fascinating, a game designed for mutual vulnerability and trust building. Truth, she replied, choosing the option that seemed less likely to expose her alien nature. Devon grinned mischievously. What's the real story between you and Mason? You two have been practically inseparable since you arrived. The room fell into expectant silence. Mason looked suddenly uncomfortable, swirling the wine in his glass. We are. Vex paused, searching for the appropriate human terminology. Colleagues, friends, neither word captured the complex energy between them. Still discovering that answer ourselves. Her response elicited a chorus of oohs and meaningful glances. Mason's cheeks flushed, a physiological response Vex found oddly endearing. Later, after the guests had departed, they stood together washing dishes, another human ritual Vex initially found puzzling but now appreciated for its meditative simplicity. Sorry about that question, Mason said, handing her a plate to dry. Devon can be nosy. Was my answer incorrect? Vex asked, carefully wiping the ceramic surface. I don't fully understand the parameters of our arrangement. Mason sat down the glass he was washing and turned to face her. Water dripped from his hands onto the kitchen floor as his amber eyes searched hers. I don't either, he admitted. I've never met anyone like you, Vex. The double meaning hung between them. She was literally unlike anyone he had ever met. A member of a different species from across the stars, yet something told her he meant more than the obvious. I find myself. Vex struggled to articulate the unfamiliar emotions coursing through her, experiencing new sensations, responses that weren't part of my training. Mason stepped closer, close enough that she could detect the slight elevation in his heart rate. What kind of sensations? Anticipation when you enter a room, displacement when you leave it. Her voice lowered, a persistent awareness of your proximity. His hand, still damp from the dishwater, gently touched her face. The contacts send a cascade of sensory information through her neural pathways. Warmth, pressure, electricity. I think, Mason said softly. There's a human word for that. Before he could speak it, Vex biointegrated alert system pulsed beneath her skin, the emergency signal she'd been dreading. She stepped back, abruptly breaking the moment. What's wrong? Mason's expression shifted from tenderness to concern. Nothing, she lied, the word bitter on her tongue. I need some air outside. Under the star-filled sky, Vex activated her partially repaired communication device. The holographic display flickered weakly, but the message was clear. The Artaxian Advanced Fleet had moved into position. They were demanding her reconnaissance report within the next 48 Earth hours, or they would proceed with standard invasion protocol. 2 days. She had 2 days to decide the fate of this world. The sound of the door opening startled her, and she quickly deactivated the hologram. Mason approached, carrying 2 steaming mugs, hot chocolate, he explained, offering one to her. Another human tradition for troubled minds. She accepted the drink, their fingers brushing in the exchange. Each casual touch now carried meaning. Complexity. Mason, she began hesitantly. If you discovered something about me, something that changed everything, would you still? She couldn't finish the question. He studied her over the rim of his mug. Is this about your research? Because I've suspected for a while it's not exactly marine biology you're interested in. The perceptiveness of humans continued to surprise her. It's more complicated than that. I know you've been collecting data, he said quietly. I've seen your equipment, watched you Documenting everything from our technology to our social structures. What I can't figure out is why the moment of truth had arrived sooner than she'd anticipated. Vex took a deep breath, an unnecessary gesture for her advanced respiratory system, but one that had become habitual during her time among humans. I was sent to assess Earth's defenses and resources. She admitted, my people, they value expansion, acquisition. Understanding dawned in Mason's eyes. You're not a researcher, you're a scout. Yes, for what? An invasion? The direct question demanded a direct answer. Yes. Mason sat down, his mug carefully, his hands trembling slightly. And all this time, getting close to me, to all of us, that was just part of your mission. Initially, Vex acknowledged the truth, painful but necessary, but something unexpected happened. What you happened? She stepped closer, risking everything. My people believe humans are primitive, simplistic, but you're complex, beautiful. You value things we've engineered out of our society, art, emotion, connection, and that changes things. A note of hope entered his voice. It changes everything. Vex reached for his hand, threading her fingers through as I was sent to prepare your world for conquest. Instead, I find myself wanting to protect it. The kiss, when it came, was neither planned nor predicted by any of Vex's advanced algorithms. Mason's lips met hers, tentatively at first, then with increasing certainty. Her sensory receptors flooded with data she had no framework to process, only the overwhelming certainty that this connection transcended biology, transcended stars. When they finally separated, Mason rested his forehead against hers. So what happens now? Vex closed her eyes, the weight of galaxies on her shoulders. Now I commit treason against my people. The Savior's not alone, Mason whispered. Whatever comes next, we face it together. Above them, invisible to Earth's detection systems, the Artaxian fleet moved into attack formation, awaiting only the command to begin. The transmission must appear authentic, Vex explained, her fingers dancing across the modified interface she'd built from Earth technology and salvage components. Commander Dren will detect deception if the signal pattern deviates from standard protocol. Dawn painted Mason's kitchen in soft golden light as they worked through their desperate plan. Neither had slept. The countdown to the Artaxian fleet deadline left no time for rest. And this, Commander Dren, he's your superior. Mason passed her another modified circuit board. She Vex corrected, is the advanced fleet commander, and my former minor. Dren selected me for this mission personally, which makes my betrayal all the more. She paused, searching for the word painful. Mason finished for her. Vex nodded, the human emotion settling uncomfortably within her. On Artaxia, loyalty to the collective superseded all individual connections. What she was attempting wouldn't simply be treason, it would be incomprehensible to her people. The modified report will suggest Earth harbors biological agents deadly to our Taxian physiology. She continued, I'll recommend a containment protocol rather than direct invasion. Mason frowned. Will they believe that it's plausible? My species has encountered biohazardous planets before. Vex connected the final component, but Dren is thorough. She may want verification. The device hummed to life, projecting a holographic keyboard into the air. Mason watched in fascination as Vex began typing in a language comprised of geometric symbols that shifted and rotated. What happens if she doesn't believe you? Vex hand-tilled momentarily. Then she'll come to verify my findings personally. The weight of those words hung between them as Vex completed the transmission with a final command gesture. She sent the falsified report hurtling through subspace toward the waiting fleet. Now we wait, she said quietly. They didn't have to wait long. That afternoon, as they walked along the beach discussing contingency plans, the sky directly above them darkened in a perfect circle, a cloaking field. Disengaging? No, Vex whispered, her face draining of color. It's too soon. A sleek craft materialized, hovering silently over the water. Unlike Vex scout ship, this vessel bristled with weapons arrays. It descended slowly, landing on the wet sand 50 meters ahead. Mason instinctively stepped in front of Vex, a futile protective gesture that made her heart constrict. Stay behind me, he urged. You don't understand. Vex pulled him back. That's an Artaxian command vessel. If Dren has come herself. The ship's entry portal dilated open, revealing the tall figure in ornate battle armor. Commander Dren strode down the extended walkway, her movements precise and predatory. She was older than Vex, with facial markings that denoted her high military rank. For armed guards flanked her. Scout Commander to Dren called out, her voice amplified. Your report contained irregularities. Vex straightened, falling automatically into the formal stance of an Artaxian officer. Commander Dren, I didn't expect personal verification. Clearly Dren's gaze shifted to Mason, studying him with clinical detachment. And this specimen part of your research? Before Vex could answer, Dren raised her hand, activating a scanner. A beam of purple light washed over Mason, who stood remarkably steady despite his fear. Interesting, Dren murmured, reading the results. You've permitted a primitive to witness our Technology that alone is a violation of protocol. The situation required adaptation, Vex replied, fighting to keep. Her voice level. Dren stepped closer, her heightened senses clearly detecting the phenomenal evidence of Vex emotional state. You've gone native, Tori. The high command suspected as much when your reports became delayed in one fluid motion. Dren drew her side weapon and aimed it at Mason. Step away from the human. No. Vex moved fully in front of Mason. Commander, my report was accurate. Earth's biosphere contains elements hostile to our Taxian biology. Does it? Din smile was cold. Curious how you show no signs of contamination despite weeks of exposure. She gestured to her guards. Seize them both. The human will make an excellent research subject. As the guards advanced, Vex reached for the concealed weapon at the small of her back, a modified version of our Taxian technology that she had adapted specifically for this contingency. Mason, she whispered urgently, when I move, run for the rocks. I'm not leaving you, he insisted. Trust me, she pleaded. Their eyes met in a moment of perfect understanding before Vex whirled into action. The weapon discharged a pulse that disrupted the guards' exosuits, temporarily paralyzing them. Dren, however, moved with the enhanced reflexes of a veteran warrior, evading the blast and firing her own weapon. The energy bolt struck Vex in the shoulder, sending her sprawling onto the sand. Mason shouted her name, rushing to her side despite her earlier instruction. Dren approached slowly, weapon trained on them both. Disappointing, Tori. I expected better from my most promising officer. She glanced at Mason, who was cradling Vex wounded form, and this emotional attachment to a lesser species. You've fallen further than I imagined possible. Through waves of pain, Vex activated the secondary function of her modified weapon, a direct link to the command vessel's propulsion system. It was a desperate gambit, one that required perfect timing. They're not lesser, Vex gasped. That's what you refuse to understand. They feel, create love in ways we've forgotten. Sentiment. Dren spat the word the weakness we engineered out of our bloodlines generations ago. Not weakness, Vex countered, her fingers completing the override sequence evolution. She pressed the final command, and Din's ship began to power up behind them, its engines cycling into an emergency purge sequence. The commander turned an alarm as warning alarms blared from the vessel. What have you done? Dren demanded. Created a choice, Vex replied. Your ship will self-destruct in 2 minutes. You can capture us, or you can save yourself and your crew. Rage contorted Dren's features, but the tactical calculation was already visible in her eyes. With a gesture of furious dismissal, she recalled her guards and retreated toward the ship. This isn't over, Tori, she called back. The fleet will come. One rogue scout cannot stop what has been set in motion. As the ship lifted off and accelerated into the clouds, Mason helped Vex to her feet. Will it really explode? Vex shook her head, wincing at the movement. No, but it will be stranded in deep space when the engines fail. She leaned against him heavily. We've bought time. Nothing more. The invasion is still coming. Mason's arms tightened around her. Then we'd better make the most of the time we have. As they made their way slowly back toward the research center, Dex gazed up at the seemingly peaceful sky, knowing what waited beyond. She had made her choice. Earth and Mason were now her home, her cause. Whatever the cost, she would defend them with everything she had. Hold still, Dr. Palmer instructed, carefully removing the makeshift bandage from Vex's shoulder. Whatever hit you cauterized the wound, but there's still significant tissue damage. 3 days had passed since the confrontation with Commander Dren. Mason had brought Vex to Iris, finally revealing the truth when Vex's injury proved beyond his ability to treat. To their surprise, the skeptical scientist had taken the revelation with remarkable composure. Honestly, it explains a lot, Iris had said, examining Vex's iridescent blood under a microscope. No human maintains such perfect posture or speaks like they've memorized a linguistics textbook. Now in the secured laboratory below the research center, Vex submitted to Iris's medical attention while Mason worked feverishly at a modified communication array the fleet will have received. Dren's warning by now, Vex said, wincing as Iris applied a regenerative compound. They'll dispatch a battle group within days. Can we contact them? Negotiate? Iris asked. Vex shook her head. The Artaxian Dominion doesn't negotiate with species they consider pre-space faring. It would be like your humans trying to negotiate with insects. Charming perspective, Iris muttered. Mason looked up from his work. What about your technology? The scout ship you arrived in, could we use it somehow? It wasn't designed for combat. Vex replied, but she hesitated. An idea forming its communication array is intact. If we could boost the signal strength and access the Artaxian command frequency, we could what ask them nicely. To leave us alone. Iris's skepticism had returned. No. Vex's eyes met Mason's across the room. We could lie. The night was clear and cool as they made their way up the mountainside to where Vex had concealed her scout ship. Mason carried the modified equipment they'd built while Vex, still weakened from her injury, navigated the difficult terrain with determination. Are you sure this will work? Mason asked, helping her over a particularly steep section. No, Vex admitted, but it's the only option with any probability of success. They reached the camouflaged vessel just as the moon rose above the horizon. Vex placed her palm against an invisible seam and the ship's entry portal dilated open. Inside, the cockpit hummed to life. At her presence, holographic displays illuminating the small space with an ethereal blue glow. Mason stared in wonder at the organic-seeming technology that responded to Vex's touch like an extension of her body. It's beautiful, he whispered. Vex's fingers danced across the controls. Help me connect our modification to the main communication array. Together, they integrated the Earth technology with the Artaxian systems, an impossible fusion that only Vex's unique knowledge could achieve. When the final connection was made, the ship's power core pulsed brighter. Now comes the difficult part, Vex said, inserting a data crystal into the console. This contains a fabricated transmission from an Artaxian science vessel warning that Earth harbors a mutagenic pathogen that affects our neural pathways. It's coded with Commander Drin's authentication signature. Won't they detect the forgery eventually? But verification protocols take time. Vex initiated the broadcast sequence. If they believe the threat is legitimate, invasion protocol requires a full biological assessment before deployment that would delay them by months, possibly years. The message streamed outward, encoded in Artaxian quantum patterns that Earth's technology couldn't detect. Vex watched the transmission progress with tension evident in every line of her body message. Since she finally announced, now we wait. Mason took her hand, his warmth seeping into her cooler skin. What if it doesn't work? Then we fight, she said simply. With whatever we have. Their eyes held in the blue-tinged darkness, volumes passing between them. Without words, Mason leaned forward, his lips finding hers in a kiss that spoke of both desperation and hope. What began as comfort deepened into something more urgent. Vex's hands traced the contours of his face, memorizing every detail as if it might be their last chance. Mason's fingers tangled in her silver blue hair, drawing her closer. If this is our last night, he whispered against her skin, I want to spend it with you. In the closed confines of the scout ship, surrounded by stars visible through the transparent viewports above, they created their own universe. Each caress bridged the vast distances between their worlds, each kiss a treaty more binding than any galactic accord. Vex had studied human physiology clinically, but experiencing the reality of intimacy with Mason transcended all academic knowledge. Her heightened senses registered every subtle change in his breathing, every quickening heartbeat. For the first time in her existence, she surrendered completely to sensation without analysis, to feeling without calculation. Hours later, they lay entwined beneath the ship's transparent dome, the Milky Way stretching above them like a cosmic tapestry. Your stars look different from mine, Vex murmured, tracing patterns on Mason's chest. But they're all made of the same stuff, he replied. Just like us, different arrangements of the same cosmic elements. A sudden alert from the ship's console interrupted the moment. Beck sat up, hastily activating the display. It's a response, she said. Scanning the Artaxian text from the high command, Mason watched her face, trying to interpret her expression. What does it say? Vex turned to him, disbelief evident in her violet eyes. There. Initiating containment protocol. The invasion force has been recalled, pending further investigation. It worked? Mason asked incredulously. For now. Vex continued reading. They've also issued a warrant for my arrest. I'm classified as compromised, potentially infected by the fictitious pathogen. What does that mean? It means I can never return home. The reality settled over her like a weight. I'm exiled. Mason sat up, taking her face gently between his hands. Or maybe you found a new home, one worth fighting for. The pain of separation from her people was real, a severing of connections that had defined her existence. Yet as she looked into Mason's eyes, Vex recognized that she had gained something precious in exchange. What will you do now? He asked. Vex gestured toward the Earth, visible through the viewport, a blue jewel suspended in darkness. Help you prepare. This deception won't hold forever. Someday they'll discover the truth and return, and we'll be ready. Mason promised. Together, as dawn broke over the Mountain, they made their way back down toward the research center. Vex paused on a ridge overlooking the ocean. The first rays of sunlight painting the water in shades of gold. Your world is worth saving, she said softly. Mason smiled, interlacing his fingers with hers. Our world now. Hand in hand they descended toward the future, uncertain, perilous, but facing it as one, an Artaxian exile and an Earth scientist charting a course between stars, between civilizations. Between hearts above them, the morning star faded into the brightening sky, one tiny light in a universe of possibilities.